The bounty hunter rode into Carlin, Nevada, with dust caking his throat and blood on his conscience. But when he saw the girl kneeling in the dirt by the saloon selling bundles of wildflowers, something shifted in his chest like a stone rolling aside from a tomb. Rose Bartley looked up from her basket of purple lupines and yellow desert marigolds, meeting the stranger's eyes for just a moment before dropping her gaze back to the flowers in her lap. She had learned not to hold eye contact too long with men who wore guns low on their hips. This one had 2 revolvers and a rifle on his saddle, and his face bore the weathered lines of someone who had seen too much of the worst parts of the frontier. Xavier Rourke dismounted slowly, his muscles aching from 3 days of hard riding. He had brought in the cattle rustler to the marshal in Elko and collected his payment, but the satisfaction that usually came with a job completed felt hollow this time. The rustler had been barely 20 years old, desperate and stupid rather than evil, and Xavier could not shake the memory of the boy's mother weeping on the courthouse steps. How much for the flowers? His voice came out rougher than he intended. Rose glanced up again, her green eyes cautious. 2 cents a bundle, sir. He looked down at the carefully tied bouquets arranged in her worn wicker basket. The flowers were fresh, picked that morning, he guessed, with stems wrapped in damp cloth to keep them from wilting in the late August heat of 1883. Her fingers were stained green from the plants, and there was dirt under her nails. She wore a faded calico dress that had been mended so many times the patches had patches. "I will take all of them." Her eyes widened. "All of them. Every bundle you have got." Rose counted quickly. "That is 20 bundles, 40 cents, sir." Xavier reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver dollar. "Keep the change." "I cannot take that much extra," she protested, already sorting out his change from a small leather pouch at her waist. "You picked them. You walked into town in this heat. Your time is worth something." He accepted the bundles as she passed them up to him, their fingers brushing briefly. Her hands were small and work-roughened, but her touch was gentle with the flowers. She handed him 60 cents change, pressing the coins firmly into his palm. "I set my prices fair, and I keep my word. 2 cents a bundle is what I charge, and 2 cents a bundle is what I will accept." Something in her quiet dignity made Xavier respect her more than any of the pompous merchants or self-important ranchers he had dealt with in recent months. He pocketed the change and looked at his armload of wildflowers, suddenly feeling foolish. What was a man like him going to do with 20 bundles of flowers? "You come to town every day?" he asked. 3 times a week. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. "I walk in from my father's homestead about 5 miles out. 10 miles round trip for pocket change, honest pocket change," she corrected him. "And it adds up. I have been saving." "For what?" The question was too personal, and he saw her walls go up. "That is my own business, sir." "Thank you for your purchase. Good day." Xavier nodded and loaded the flowers into his saddlebag, though most would not fit. He ended up tying bundles to his saddle horn and bedroll until his horse looked like it was decorated for some kind of parade. A few men outside the saloon chuckled at the sight, but Xavier ignored them. He led his horse down to the livery stable, paid for 3 days of boarding and feed, and carried the ridiculous abundance of flowers to the boarding house where he rented a room. Mrs. Chen, the Chinese woman who ran the establishment, raised her eyebrows when she saw him coming up the stairs with his arms full of wildflowers. "You rob a flower seller, Mr. Rourke?" she asked in her precise English. "Bought them fair and square. What you do with so many flowers?" That was the question, was it not? Xavier distributed bouquets throughout his small room, setting them in the wash basin, the water pitcher, a tin cup, and even his boots. The room smelled like the prairie after rain, fresh and alive. He sat on his bed and stared at the flowers, thinking about the girl with the careful dignity and the green-stained fingers. That night, he could not sleep. He kept thinking about Rose walking 10 miles in the heat for pennies, kept wondering what she was saving for, kept remembering the wariness in her eyes when she looked at his guns. Xavier had been working as a bounty hunter for 5 years, ever since he left his father's ranch in Colorado after a dispute over whether to fence in the range. He had been good at tracking, good at bringing men in alive more often than dead, good at collecting his payment and moving on to the next job. But lately, he had started to wonder what the point of it all was. He was 32 years old, had money saved in banks across 3 states, and no one to spend it with or leave it to. The next morning, he walked around Carlin, really looking at it for the first time. The town had grown up around the Central Pacific Railroad depot, serving as a supply point for the ranches and mines scattered across northeastern Nevada. The main street consisted of 2 saloons, a general store, a hotel, a blacksmith, a livery stable, the boarding house where he stayed, and a handful of other businesses. The land around was high desert, sparse and unforgiving but beautiful in its own way with the Ruby Mountains visible to the south. He found himself at the general store, talking to the proprietor about seeds and gardening. The man, a portly fellow named Hiram Sutton, seemed surprised by the questions. "You planning on farming, Mr. Rourke? Thought you were a hunter. Just curious about what grows well in these parts." "Not much, if you want the truth. The growing season is short and the soil is poor unless you amend it considerable. But vegetables do all right if you water them regular. Some folks have luck with flowers too, the hardy kinds. Why you asking?" Xavier was not ready to explain, maybe because he did not fully understand it himself. General interest. He left the store with a book on Western gardening and walked back to his room, reading it cover to cover. By the time Monday came around again, he had a plan that was probably foolish, but he could not shake it from his mind. He was waiting by the spot where Rose set up her flower-selling operation when she arrived that morning, her basket full of fresh blooms. She looked surprised to see him and more than a little wary. "Sir, I only pick so many flowers. If you buy them all again, I will have no chance to sell to anyone else, and folks will stop expecting to find me here." "I am not here to buy today," Xavier said. "I wanted to ask you something." "Where do you pick the flowers?" "All over. Different places depending on what is blooming. There is a meadow up in the hills where the lupines grow thick, and a wash where the monkey flowers like it. The marigolds grow in lots of places. How long does it take you to gather a full basket?" She looked at him suspiciously. "Why do you want to know?" "I am trying to understand your business. How much time and effort you put in for what you earn." "About 3 hours of picking, then the 5-mile walk to town, then usually 2 or 3 hours of selling, then the walk back. So most of a day, 3 days a week. I make about $1.50 a week, sometimes $2 if I am lucky." Xavier did the arithmetic in his head. At least 30 hours of labor for less than $2. "What is your father's homestead like? What concern is that of yours?" Her voice had an edge now. "You ask a lot of questions for someone who is not buying flowers today. I apologize. You are right. It is just that I had an idea and I wanted to see if you might be interested in hearing it." Rose shifted her basket to her other arm. "What kind of idea?" "What if you did not have to walk 10 miles and spend all day picking and selling flowers to make your money? What if the flowers grew at your place, in a proper garden, and you could sell them in bigger bundles for better prices?" "That would be fine, except gardens require seeds and tools and know-how, none of which I have money for. Why do you think I am out here picking wild ones?" Xavier took a breath. "I could set up a garden for you, buy the supplies, do the work of getting it started. You would own it, and you would keep all the money from selling the flowers it produces. She stared at him like he had just suggested flying to the moon. Why would you do that? It was a fair question, and he did not have a clear answer. Maybe I am tired of what I have been doing and looking for something different. Maybe I like that you made me take the right change. Maybe I just want to see if I can make something grow instead of spending my time hunting men. You do not even know me. Then let me get to know you. Let me meet your father, see your place, and if you decide you do not trust me, I will leave and never bother you again. Rose studied his face for a long moment. He could see her weighing the offer, looking for the trap. Finally, she said, "My father is not well. He had a stroke 2 years ago and cannot work the land anymore. It is just the two of us out there, and if you have bad intentions, there is not much we could do to stop you. I understand why you would be cautious. What if I bring someone with me? A woman, so you know it is respectable. Mrs. Chen from the boarding house, maybe. You would do that. I will do whatever makes you feel safe enough to consider this." She bit her lip, thinking. A potential customer approached, a woman in a fine dress who bought 2 bundles of flowers and complimented Rose on their freshness. After the woman left, Rose turned back to Xavier. "All right, you can come out to our place this afternoon with Mrs. Chen, but I am not promising anything." Xavier felt an unexpected surge of relief. "That is all I ask, just a chance." He spent the rest of the morning making arrangements. Mrs. Chen was skeptical, but agreed to accompany him after he explained the situation. She had a shrewd look in her eye that suggested she understood more about his motivations than he did himself. "You be careful, Mr. Rourke. That girl is poor but honest. She not need some man coming in and making promises he not keep. I mean to keep any promises I make. We see about that." They rented a wagon from the livery and drove out to the Bartley homestead in the afternoon heat. Rose had given them directions, and they found the place without too much trouble. It was a modest operation, maybe 40 acres of land with a small house that was barely more than a cabin, a leaning barn, and a few outbuildings in various states of disrepair. There was a well with a decent pump, and some straggly chickens pecking in the yard. The land itself was typical high desert, covered in sagebrush and bunch grass, with rocky soil that would need a lot of work to become productive. Rose came out of the house when she heard the wagon, wiping her hands on her apron. Behind her, moving slowly with a cane, came a man Xavier assumed was her father. Thomas Bartley was maybe 55, with one side of his face drooping from the stroke and his left arm held stiffly against his body. "Papa, this is Mr. Rourke and Mrs. Chen from town. Mr. Rourke has a business proposition." Thomas looked Xavier up and down with shrewd, suspicious eyes. His speech was slurred but understandable. "What kind of proposition?" Xavier explained his idea about setting up a flower garden, making it clear that it would belong to Rose, and that he was offering to do the work and provide the supplies without expecting any payment or ownership. As he talked, he could see the doubt and suspicion in both Bartley's faces. "And what do you get out of this?" Thomas asked bluntly. It was the question Xavier had been asking himself. "Honest answer, I am not entirely sure. I have spent the last 5 years tracking down wanted men for money, and it is wearing on me. I want to do something different, something that builds instead of just bringing people in for justice. And I met your daughter, and she impressed me with her dignity and her work ethic, and I thought this might be a way to help while also giving myself a project. You trying to court my daughter?" Xavier felt heat rise to his face. "I did not start this with that intention, but I will not lie and say I did not notice that she is a fine woman. But that is not a condition of anything. If she wants me to set up the garden and then never see me again, I will do that." Rose spoke up. "Papa, Mrs. Chen came along to make it all proper, and we could use the help. You know we could. Thomas leaned heavily on his cane. Show me where you thinking of putting this garden. They walked around the property, with Xavier pointing out a spot near the house that had good sun and was close to the well for watering. The soil there was slightly better than the rest, and there was a natural wind break from a small rise to the north. Mrs. Chen asked practical questions about seeds and tools, and Rose listened carefully to everything, occasionally asking questions of her own. By the time the sun was lowering toward the Ruby Mountains, Thomas had grudgingly agreed to let Xavier proceed, with conditions. You do the work during the day, no coming around after dark unless you are invited. You treat my daughter with respect at all times, and if I see anything I do not like, you leave and do not come back. Those terms are more than fair, sir. Thank you for giving me this chance. Over the next several weeks, Xavier threw himself into the project with an intensity that surprised him. He bought tools, seeds, lumber for raised beds, compost and manure to amend the soil, and everything else the gardening book recommended. He hired a man with a plow to break up the ground, then spent days working the soil himself, mixing in the amendments until the hard desert earth began to look like something that might actually support plant life. Rose watched him work, bringing him water and occasionally helping when she was not tending to her father or managing the household. At first, their conversations were brief and practical, but gradually she began to open up. She told him about growing up on the homestead, about her mother who had died of pneumonia 4 years ago, about her father's stroke that had changed everything. We were never rich, but we got by when Papa could work. He ran cattle, just a small herd but enough. After the stroke, we had to sell most of them. Now we have got 5 cows and not much else. I do some washing and mending for people in town, sell the eggs from our chickens and pick the flowers. It is barely enough. What were you saving for? Xavier asked, remembering their first conversation. Medicine. There is a doctor in Elko who thinks he might be able to help Papa, but it would cost $50 just for the consultation. I have saved $23 in 2 years. The amount was heartbreaking. Xavier made that much from a single bounty sometimes. But he said nothing, just kept working the soil. As the garden began to take shape, with raised beds built and planted with a variety of flowers chosen for their hardiness and continuous blooming, Xavier found himself looking forward to the days he spent at the Bartley place. It was not just the satisfaction of watching seeds sprout and plants grow, though that was part of it. It was Rose herself, the way she smiled when she saw the first tiny seedlings pushing through the soil, the way she listened intently when he explained what he was doing and why, the way she laughed at his jokes even when they were not particularly funny. Thomas watched their growing friendship with a complicated expression. One evening, as Xavier was packing up his tools, the older man called him over. "You are falling for my daughter." Xavier could have denied it, but what would be the point? "Yes, sir, I believe I am. She is 22 years old and has not had much opportunity to meet eligible men. You are the first one who has shown her any real attention. That makes me nervous." "Why?" "Because I do not know what happens when the garden is finished. Do you stay? Do you go? Does she get her heart broken?" "I need to know your intentions." Xavier set down his tools and looked Thomas in the eye. "I have been asking myself the same questions. I came to Carlin planning to stay a few days, pick up any bounty work that might be available, then move on like I always do. But something changed when I saw Rose that first day. I cannot explain it exactly. It was like I had been walking through a dust storm for years, and suddenly the air cleared and I could see properly. And the more time I spend here, the more I think maybe I am done with bounty hunting." Maybe it is time to settle somewhere and build a different kind of life. With my daughter, if she will have me, but I am not going to rush her or pressure her. I will finish this garden because I said I would, and then I will ask her properly if I can court her, and if she says no, I will respect that." Thomas nodded slowly. "You are older than her. 10 years. Too much, not so much that it worries me. Just means you ought to have your life figured out better than you seem to." Xavier laughed ruefully. "You would think so, would you not?" By mid-October, the garden was established and growing well. The fall flowers were blooming, hardy varieties like asters and chrysanthemums that could handle the cold nights. Xavier had built a small greenhouse, using salvaged windows to extend the growing season and protect the more delicate plants. He had also built a proper work shed for storing seeds, tools, and cut flowers. Rose had taken to the garden with natural skill, learning quickly how to care for the plants, when to water and how much, how to deadhead spent blooms to encourage more flowers, how to harvest at the right time. She started bringing bigger, more impressive bouquets to town, charging more because they were clearly superior to the wildflowers. Her income nearly tripled. One Friday afternoon, after they had worked together harvesting flowers for her Monday sales, Xavier asked if they could talk. His heart was hammering in his chest like he was facing down an armed outlaw, which was ridiculous. This was just a conversation, but it felt more important than any gunfight. They sat on the bench he had built near the garden, looking out at the rows of flowers swaying in the breeze. The Ruby Mountains were dusted with early snow, and the air had a sharp, clean smell. "The garden is pretty much done," Xavier said. "There will always be maintenance and seasonal work, but the big project is finished." "You did an amazing job," Rose said softly. "I cannot believe this is real sometimes. I keep thinking I am going to wake up and it will all be gone. It is real, and it is yours. I had the land surveyed and everything is documented. This garden and all its supplies belong to you legally. Xavier, I do not know how I can ever repay you." He turned to face her. "I do not want repayment, but I would like to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, even if you think it might hurt my feelings." She met his eyes, her expression serious. "All right." "These past weeks, working with you, getting to know you, have been the best of my life. I have not felt this happy or this purposeful in longer than I can remember. And I hope, that maybe you have enjoyed my company too. So I am asking if I can court you properly. I want to come around not just to work on the garden, but to spend time with you. I want to take you to dinner in town, go on walks, have conversations, and see if this thing between us might grow into something permanent." Rose was quiet for a moment, and Xavier's heart sank. But then she smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "I would like that very much." "You would? Did you think I watched you work every day just to learn about gardening? Xavier Rourke, I have been hoping you would ask me for the last month." Relief and joy flooded through him. "Why did you not say anything?" "Because I wanted you to be sure. I wanted it to be your choice, not something you felt obligated to do because you built me a garden." He reached out and took her hand, marveling at how right it felt. "Rose Bartley, you are an amazing woman," she laughed. "I am a poor homesteader's daughter who sells flowers for pennies. You are hardworking, honest, kind, and beautiful. You are exactly what I did not know I was looking for." Their courtship over the next months was the happiest time of either of their lives. Xavier officially retired from bounty hunting, much to the surprise of the marshals and sheriffs who had regularly employed him. He took a job working for the railroad, which paid decent wages and kept him in the Carlin area. He rented a small house in town, but spent most of his free time at the Bartley homestead, helping with whatever needed doing and spending time with Rose. They talked about everything: She told him about her dreams of expanding the flower business, maybe eventually selling to shops in bigger towns like Elko or even Reno. He told her about his childhood in Colorado, about the rift with his father that had never healed, about the men he had hunted and the toll it had taken on his spirit. "You ever regret it?" she asked one evening as they walked through the garden together, checking on the plants settling in for winter. "The bounty hunting, I mean. I regret some of how it changed me, made me harder, more suspicious, but I cannot regret the path that led me here to you." Thomas watched their courtship with approval, his initial suspicions fading as Xavier proved himself reliable and sincere. One night in December, Xavier asked formally for permission to marry Rose. "About time," Thomas said. "I was wondering if you were ever going to get around to it." "Yes, you have my blessing." Xavier proposed on Christmas Eve with a ring he had bought from a jeweler in Elko, a simple gold band with a small sapphire. They were in the garden, now mostly dormant for winter but still beautiful under a fresh layer of snow. "Rose, I came to this town lost and tired, and you gave me something to build instead of destroy. You gave me a reason to stay in one place and put down roots. You gave me hope for a future I had stopped believing in. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said through happy tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in March of 1884 in a small ceremony at the church in Carlin. Mrs. Chen stood up for Rose, and the railroad supervisor stood up for Xavier. Thomas gave his daughter away with tears in his eyes. After the ceremony, they held a simple reception at the boarding house, with food Mrs. Chen had prepared and guests from the town who had come to know and like the couple. Xavier moved to the homestead, and together he and Rose began building their life. The garden flourished under their joint care, and Rose's flower business grew steadily. Xavier continued working for the railroad while also helping improve the homestead, repairing the barn, fixing fences, and making plans for expanding their operations. That first year of marriage was not without challenges. Money was tight, and the work was hard. There were disagreements about priorities and methods, times when they snapped at each other out of exhaustion or frustration. But they learned to communicate, to compromise, to support each other through difficulties. And through it all, their love deepened and matured into something solid and lasting. Thomas's health gradually improved with better food and less stress about the homestead's finances. While he never regained full use of his left side, he could get around better and even help with light tasks. Having Xavier around took a huge weight off his shoulders. In the spring of 1885, Rose discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier one morning as they worked together in the garden, planting summer annuals, "I am going to have a baby." He dropped the trowel he was holding. "You are sure?" "Pretty sure. I have missed 2 courses and I have been sick in the mornings." Xavier swept her into his arms, careful not to hold too tight. "This is wonderful, terrifying but wonderful. You are going to be a father. And you are going to be a mother. Our child is very lucky." The pregnancy progressed normally, though Rose hated being sick and tired all the time. Xavier worried constantly, fussing over her until she had to tell him to stop. She kept working in the garden as long as she could, knowing they needed the income. In October, with the leaves turning gold on the few trees around the homestead and the mountains brilliant with fall color, Rose went into labor. Mrs. Chen came out from town to help, along with a midwife who lived on a ranch nearby. Thomas sat with Xavier on the porch while the women worked inside, both men too nervous to do anything productive. "You know, the first one is always the hardest," Thomas said, "but women are tougher than us. She will be all right." "I hope so." "I do not know what I would do if anything happened to her." "Do not borrow trouble, just pray." So Xavier prayed, perhaps more fervently than he ever had in his life. When he finally heard the baby cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. Mrs. Chen came out smiling. "You have a son, and Rose is tired but fine. Come meet your boy." Xavier went inside on shaky legs. Rose was propped up in bed, exhausted and sweaty but smiling, with a tiny bundle in her arms. He approached slowly, awestruck by the sight. "Meet Samuel Thomas Rourke," Rose said softly. The baby was red and wrinkly and perfect. Xavier reached out and touched one impossibly small hand, and Samuel's fingers curled around his. In that moment, Xavier felt something shift in his heart. This was what mattered. This was what life was about. Not hunting men or earning bounties or even building gardens, though those things had their place. It was about family, about love, about creating new life and nurturing it. "He is beautiful," Xavier whispered. "He looks like you." "Poor kid," Rose laughed weakly. "Stop it. You are handsome, and you know it, and you are going to be an amazing father." "I am going to try my best." The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel grew from a baby into a curious, energetic toddler. The flower garden expanded, with Rose developing a reputation across the region for quality blooms. She started growing vegetables too, selling them at a farmer's market that started up in Carlin. Xavier was promoted at the railroad and began making good money. They bought more land, increasing the homestead to 80 acres. They added cattle and sheep, building slowly toward real prosperity. In 1887, Rose gave birth to a daughter they named Clara Margaret. In 1890, another son arrived named James Henry. Thomas lived to see all 3 grandchildren, passing away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1891 at the age of 63. His death was hard, but he had lived long enough to see his daughter happy and secure, which Rose said was all he wanted. Xavier never completely lost his edge, the wariness and skills that had kept him alive during his bounty hunting years. But those qualities became protective rather than aggressive, focused on keeping his family safe rather than tracking down dangerous men. He taught Samuel and eventually James how to shoot and track, but always with the emphasis on responsibility and protection, never looking for trouble. Rose blossomed over the years, growing from a cautious young woman picking wildflowers to make Pennies into a confident businesswoman and mother. The flower garden that Xavier had planted for her became the foundation of their prosperity, but it was her skill and vision that made it truly successful. She never forgot where she came from, though, and she always made sure to help others in the community who were struggling like she once had. The garden itself became something of a local landmark. People would drive out from town just to see it when the flowers were in full bloom, and more than one young man proposed to his sweetheart among the rows of blossoms. Rose kept meticulous records of what worked and what did not, constantly experimenting with new varieties and techniques. She taught other women in the area how to grow flowers for profit, sharing her knowledge freely. By the mid-1890s, the Rourke family was well established in the Carlin community. Their children attended the local school, where Samuel proved to be a natural scholar while Clara showed artistic talent, and James was good with animals. Xavier served on the town council and helped organize improvements to infrastructure. Rose joined the Church Ladies' Society and worked on charitable efforts. But for all their success and community involvement, their favorite times were still the quiet moments together. Evening walks through the garden, family dinners around the kitchen table, Sunday afternoons when they could all just be together without work pressing. Xavier often marveled at how his life had changed, how a chance encounter with a young woman selling wildflowers had transformed everything. One night in August of 1895, exactly 12 years after that first meeting, Xavier and Rose sat together on the bench in the garden after the children were asleep. The night was warm and clear, with stars blazing overhead and crickets singing in the darkness. "Do you remember the first day you saw me?" Rose asked. "Every detail. You were kneeling by the saloon, and you looked up at me with those green eyes, and something just stopped inside me. I knew right then that you were important, even though I did not understand why. I thought you were trouble. A bounty hunter buying flowers, what was I supposed to think? You were right to be cautious. I was trouble, or I had been. You and this garden saved me from that life." Rose leaned against his shoulder. "You saved me too. I was so tired, Xavier. Tired of struggling, tired of watching Papa decline, tired of working so hard for so little. And then you showed up and changed everything. We changed everything together. Do you ever miss it? The excitement of bounty hunting, the adventure." Xavier thought about it honestly. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it. You had a target, you tracked them down, you brought them in, you got paid. It was straightforward. But I do not miss the violence or the loneliness or the emptiness of it. This life, with you and the children, is worth 1,000 adventures. Even when Clara spills milk all over the floor right after I mopped it, or when Samuel and James fight over who gets to feed the chickens, or when the garden freezes early and we lose half the fall flowers," he laughed. "Even then. Especially then, because those are real problems, family problems, not life and death situations. I spent years living like every day might be my last, and it makes you hard inside. Being able to worry about normal things, deal with normal problems, that is a gift." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds and watching the stars. The garden around them represented so much more than just flowers and income. It was a symbol of transformation, of love taking root and growing into something beautiful and lasting. "I want to tell the children the story someday," Rose said. "About how we met, about the garden, about how love can grow from the smallest seeds. You make it sound like a fairy tale. Is it not, though? The princess picking flowers, the knight who rides up and changes her life. In fairy tales, the knight is usually young and handsome and noble. I was a weathered bounty hunter with blood on his hands. You were exactly what I needed, and you are still young enough and handsome enough for me." She kissed him, sweet and familiar, and Xavier felt the same spark he had felt that first day. As the years continued to pass, the Rourke family grew and changed. Samuel graduated from school and, instead of staying on the homestead, won a scholarship to attend the university in Reno, where he studied agriculture and business. Clara developed her artistic talents, creating beautiful paintings of the Nevada landscape that began to sell in galleries. James turned out to have his father's practical skills and his mother's way with growing things, and he took over more and more of the day-to-day management of the farm and garden. In 1898, at the age of 33, Rose gave birth to their fourth and final child, a daughter named Alice Rose. She was a surprise, coming so many years after James, but a welcome one. Xavier, now 47, found himself learning to change diapers and handle middle-of-the-night feedings all over again, much to the amusement of his older children. The turn of the century found the Rourke family prosperous and happy. The homestead had grown to over 200 acres with a thriving flower operation, extensive vegetable gardens, cattle, sheep, and even some horses Xavier had started breeding. They had built a new, larger house to accommodate their growing family, though they kept the old cabin for storage and sentiment. Rose had become something of a local celebrity for her flowers, with people placing orders months in advance for weddings and special events. She had even started shipping flowers by rail to Reno and Sacramento, preserved in innovative packing methods she had developed. The little wildflower business that had started with bundles sold for 2 pennies had become a substantial enterprise. But success never changed Rose's fundamental nature. She still remembered what it was like to struggle, and she made sure to help others whenever she could. She employed several women from struggling families to help with the flower business, paying them fair wages and teaching them skills. She donated regularly to the church's charity fund. And she always insisted on fair dealing and honest prices, just as she had that first day when she had refused Xavier's extra money. Xavier had long since shed his reputation as a bounty hunter. Most people in Carlin knew him simply as Rose's husband, a railroad man and rancher, a devoted father and community member. The guns he once wore low on his hips stayed locked in a cabinet, taken out only for occasional target practice or when cattle needed to be protected from predators. The hard edge that had once defined him had been worn smooth by years of love and family life. In 1903, Samuel returned from university with his degree and a wife, a smart young woman named Elizabeth who shared his interest in modern agricultural methods. They settled on a portion of the homestead, building their own house and starting their own family. Samuel began implementing new techniques he had learned, and the farm's productivity increased even more. Clara, at 19, was making a name for herself as an artist, with shows in Reno and San Francisco. She traveled frequently but always came home to Nevada, saying the light and landscape fed her soul. She had inherited her mother's independent spirit and her father's determination. James, at 23, had grown into a steady, reliable young man. He married a rancher's daughter named Martha, and together they managed the livestock operation while Rose and Xavier focused on the gardens and flower business. James had Xavier's practical skills and Rose's patience, making him perfectly suited to ranch work. And little Alice, just 5 years old in 1903, was already showing signs of combining all her siblings' talents. Samuel's intelligence, Clara's creativity, and James's steadiness. She loved the garden above all else, following her mother around and asking endless questions about the plants. One evening in the summer of 1903, Xavier and Rose took a rare evening alone, having arranged for the children to stay with Samuel and Elizabeth. They walked through the garden as they had done countless times over the years, but this time Xavier had a surprise planned. He led Rose to a new section of the garden she had not seen yet, one he had been working on in secret with James's help. There, he had planted a special area with every variety of wildflower he could find that resembled the ones she had been selling that first day they met. Purple lupines, yellow desert marigolds, Indian paintbrush, wild asters, and more, all growing in beautiful profusion. "Xavier, this is gorgeous." "When did you do this?" "Over the last few months. James helped me source the seeds and plants. I wanted to create something that reminded us of where we started. You were picking wildflowers for Pennies, and I was lost and searching for meaning. And somehow, those wildflowers led us to all of this." He gestured at the expansive garden, the homestead beyond, the life they had built together. Rose had tears in her eyes. 20 years. Has it really been 20 years since that day? 20 years this month since I rode into Carlin and saw you sitting by the saloon. Best day of my life, though I did not know it then. I was so suspicious of you. I thought you were just another rough man who would cause trouble. I was a rough man. You smoothed out my edges. She laughed. We smoothed each other's edges. You made me less fearful, more willing to take chances and trust people. I made you less closed off, more able to express feelings and build connections. They sat on a bench Xavier had placed in the wildflower section, holding hands and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The Ruby Mountains were dark silhouettes against the colorful sky, and the evening air was rich with the scent of blooming flowers. "I have been thinking about the future," Rose said, "about what happens to all of this when we are gone." "That is cheerful. I am serious. We have built something wonderful here, Xavier. I want to make sure it continues. The children will inherit it, they will keep it going." "I know, but I want to do more. I have been thinking about starting a school, a place where women can learn about horticulture and business. So many women are in the position I was in, struggling to make a few pennies however they can. What if we could teach them to do what I did, to build real businesses?" Xavier smiled. "That is ambitious and expensive, and also a wonderful idea. Let us talk to Samuel about how to make it happen. He has the business sense to help figure out the logistics. You do not think it is foolish?" "Rose, you turned a basket of wildflowers into a thriving business that supports multiple families. If anyone can create a successful school, it is you." They stayed in the garden until the stars came out, planning and dreaming about the future. It was moments like these that reminded Xavier why he had fallen in love with Rose. She had never been content with just survival. Once their own family was secure, she immediately started thinking about how to help others, how to build something that would outlast them. Over the next several years, Rose's school began to take shape. With Samuel's help with business planning, Xavier's financial backing, and support from several successful women in Reno and other Nevada cities, they established the Nevada School of Horticulture for Women. It started small, with just a few students learning in a renovated barn on the homestead, but it grew steadily. Rose taught many of the classes herself, sharing everything she had learned over the years about growing flowers, managing a business, dealing with suppliers and customers, and balancing work with family life. Other instructors were brought in to teach advanced topics like plant biology, soil science, and bookkeeping. The school accepted students regardless of their ability to pay, with scholarships funded by the successful graduates of earlier classes. Xavier, now in his 50s, gradually stepped back from the railroad work and focused more on the homestead and supporting Rose's educational efforts. He found satisfaction in helping young women learn the practical skills they would need, teaching classes on building greenhouses, irrigation systems, and other infrastructure. The wildflower garden he had created as a surprise for Rose became a teaching garden, where students could learn about native plants and natural landscaping. It was fitting, Xavier thought, that the wildflowers had come full circle, from the pennies they earned Rose when she was struggling, to the symbol of how far she had come, to a teaching tool for the next generation. In 1908, Clara married a fellow artist, and they settled in Reno but visited the homestead frequently. She painted a series of portraits of her mother teaching at the school, and these paintings were displayed in galleries across the state, raising awareness of the school and attracting more students and donors. James and Martha had 3 children who loved the ranch life. Samuel and Elizabeth had 4 children, and the homestead rang with the laughter of grandchildren. Alice, now 10, was already talking about taking over the flower business someday, showing the same passion for plants that her mother had. On August 15, 1908, exactly 25 years after they first met, Xavier organized a celebration. He invited the whole community, all the family, former students of the school, and anyone else whose lives had been touched by Rose's work. They held the party in the gardens, which were in full glorious bloom. People gave speeches about Rose's impact on their lives. Former students talked about how the school had given them skills and confidence to build their own businesses. Community members spoke about her generosity and kindness. Family members shared funny and touching stories. When it was Xavier's turn to speak, he stood next to Rose and took her hand. 25 years ago, I was a man with no real home, no family, and no purpose beyond the next bounty. I rode into Carlin planning to stay a few days, then move on like I always did. But then, I saw a young woman sitting by the saloon, selling bundles of wildflowers for 2 cents each. And something in me recognized that this was where I was supposed to be, that she was who I was supposed to be with. I bought all her flowers that day, and she insisted on giving me the correct change. That moment told me everything I needed to know about her character: honest, principled, fair. Over the years, she has shown me what real strength looks like, what dedication and vision can accomplish, what love means. This garden started as a gift for her, but it became a gift for all of us, a place of beauty and learning and growth. Rose, you took a bounty hunter and turned him into a husband and father and grandfather. You took wildflowers and turned them into a legacy. I am grateful for every day of these 25 years, and I look forward to however many more we have together. There was not a dry eye in the crowd as he finished. Rose stood and kissed him, and everyone applauded. The party continued late into the evening, with music and dancing and food and laughter. As the stars came out and the party began to wind down, Xavier and Rose slipped away to their special bench in the wildflower section. They sat together, tired but happy, listening to the sounds of their family and community celebrating nearby. 25 years, Rose said softly. It has gone by so fast, and so slow, all at the same time. Some days feel endless, but the years fly by. Do you have any regrets? Xavier thought carefully. I regret the years before I met you, the time I wasted being someone I did not particularly like. But I cannot regret the path that brought me to you. So no real regrets. You, none. Well, maybe I regret not trusting you faster at the beginning. I could have had a few more months of happiness. You were wise to be cautious. I was a stranger asking to do something that probably sounded too good to be true. But you kept your word. You built the garden and you asked for nothing in return except a chance. Best investment I ever made. They sat quietly, holding hands and watching the stars. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing some game, their laughter floating on the evening air. The garden around them rustled softly in the breeze, full of life and promise. What do you think happens next? Rose asked. We are getting older, Xavier. I am 46, you are 57. We have maybe another 20 or 30 years if we are lucky and healthy. Then we spend those years doing what we have always done, loving each other, supporting our family, helping our community, tending our garden. We watch our grandchildren grow up and maybe even see great-grandchildren. We keep teaching and learning and growing. We keep building the legacy. That sounds like a good plan. It is the only plan I want. When I bought those wildflowers from you, I was trying to buy my way into a different life. Turned out you could not buy your way in. You had to earn it day by day, choice by choice. And you helped me earn it, Rose. You gave me the chance to become someone better. We made each other better. That is what love does when it is real. The years continued, bringing the inevitable changes that time always brings. Xavier's hair went completely white, and he moved a bit slower, though he remained active and engaged with the homestead and family. Rose developed arthritis in her hands, which made gardening difficult some days, but she refused to stop working entirely. She just adapted, found new ways to do things, and relied more on her students and employees. The school continued to thrive and grow. By 1915, it had its own dedicated campus on land adjacent to the original homestead, with proper classrooms, greenhouses, and demonstration gardens. Hundreds of women had graduated from the program, and many had gone on to start successful businesses of their own. Some stayed in Nevada, others spread across the West, but they all carried Rose's lessons about hard work, honesty, and fair dealing. Alice, now 17, was preparing to take over more of the day-to-day management of the flower business. She had her mother's gift for growing things and her father's head for business. She also had ideas for expanding into new markets, using the increasing network of railroads to ship flowers even further. The world was changing rapidly. Automobiles were becoming more common, replacing horses and wagons. Electricity was reaching even rural areas like Carlin. The Great War was raging in Europe, though America had not yet entered. But through all the changes, the Rourke homestead remained a constant, a place of beauty and productivity and family. In the spring of 1916, Xavier fell ill with pneumonia. At 65, his body did not fight off the infection as well as it might have when he was younger. He spent weeks in bed, with Rose and the family taking turns caring for him. There were several scary nights when they thought they might lose him, but he was stubborn and fought his way back to health. During his recovery, as he lay weak in bed, Rose sat with him constantly. They talked about everything and nothing, reliving memories and making plans for the future, and sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. "I am not ready to lose you," Rose told him one afternoon. "We have more years ahead of us. More grandchildren to meet, more gardens to plant, more sunsets to watch." "I am not planning on going anywhere," Xavier replied, his voice still weak. "I did not survive getting shot at by outlaws just to be taken down by a chest cold. Pneumonia is more than a chest cold. Details. Point is, I am too stubborn to die yet. We have things to do." And he did recover, though it took months to fully regain his strength. By summer, he was back to working in the gardens, moving slower but determined. The illness had scared them both, made them aware of their mortality in a new way. But it also reminded them to appreciate each day they had. In 1917, when America entered the Great War, Samuel's oldest son enlisted despite the family's protests. It was a difficult time, filled with worry and fear. But the young man survived the war and returned home in 1919, changed by his experiences but alive. The homestead welcomed him back with a huge celebration, and Xavier and Rose were grateful that their family had been spared the worst of the war's costs. The 1920s brought continued prosperity. The flower business adapted to changing times, with Alice introducing new techniques and technologies. The school continued to graduate successful women. The homestead remained the heart of an extended family that now numbered over 30 people across multiple generations. Xavier and Rose, now in their 60s and 70s respectively, became the beloved grandparents and great-grandparents, the wise elders whose advice was sought on everything from planting schedules to relationship problems. They had lived long enough to see the fruits of their labor multiply far beyond anything they had imagined that first day. On quiet evenings, they still walked through the gardens together, moving slower now but still hand in hand. The wildflower section Xavier had planted for their 20th anniversary had matured into something spectacular, a riot of color and life that changed with the seasons. Students from the school often used it as a meditation garden, finding peace among the native blooms. "Do you remember what you were saving for?" Xavier asked one evening as they walked. "That first day you said you were saving money, but you would not tell me what for. For Papa's doctor bills. I was trying to get enough to take him to that specialist in Elko. Did we ever do that?" "We did, actually, about a year after we married. You paid for it, and the doctor said there was not much to be done, but he gave us some exercises that helped Papa regain a bit more mobility. It made the last years of his life better. I had forgotten about that. You did a lot of things like that, quiet kindnesses that you never made a fuss about. Paying for things, helping people, solving problems. You did it so naturally that sometimes I think you did not even realize you were doing it. I learned it from you. You were always helping people, even when you barely had enough for yourself. We made a good team, the best team. As they reached their 80s, both Xavier and Rose slowed down considerably. Xavier's eyesight began to fail and Rose's arthritis grew worse. But their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other never wavered. They spent most of their time on the porch of the house, watching the family bustle around the homestead, offering advice when asked and staying quiet when not. The garden, now tended primarily by Alice and her staff, continued to flourish. The school had expanded to include programs in landscape design and botanical science, becoming one of the premier horticultural schools in the West. Everything Xavier and Rose had built together had taken root and grown beyond them, which was exactly what they had hoped for. In the summer of 1928, they celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary with a smaller, more intimate gathering than the 25th had been. Just close family, a few old friends, and some of the original students from the school. Xavier was 82, Rose was 72, and they both knew they were nearing the end of their time. 45 years, Xavier said during the celebration. Almost half a century. And I would not change a single day. Not even the hard ones, someone asked. Especially not the hard ones. Those were when we proved what we were made of, when we showed what our love could withstand. The easy days are pleasant, but the hard days are when you really build something lasting. Late that night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Xavier and Rose sat together in their room. Through the window, they could see the garden in the moonlight, beautiful and serene. "I think we did all right," Rose said softly. "We built something good, better than good. We built something meaningful. A family, a business, a school, a legacy. And we did it with love and honesty and hard work. Thank you for buying my wildflowers that day." Xavier smiled. "Thank you for insisting on the correct change. That was when I knew you were special." "I love you, Xavier Rourke. I have loved you for 45 years, and I will love you forever beyond that. And I love you, Rose. You saved me from a life I did not want and gave me one I could not have imagined. You are everything to me." They fell asleep that night holding hands, just as they had done for thousands of nights before. Xavier passed away peacefully in his sleep in October of 1928, at the age of 82. He went to bed one night and simply did not wake up. Rose found him in the morning, still looking peaceful, and she sat with him for a long time before telling the family. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people. The bounty hunter who had become a pillar of the community, the devoted husband and father and grandfather, was mourned and celebrated. They buried him on a hill overlooking the homestead and the gardens, where he could eternally watch over what he had helped build. Rose grieved deeply, but did not fall apart. She had known this day was coming, had prepared herself as much as anyone can prepare for losing their life partner. She drew strength from her family, from the community, and from the gardens that still bloomed with life and color. She lived for another 5 years, continuing to be active in the school and the business as much as her health allowed. She spent a lot of time sitting by Xavier's grave, talking to him about their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about the gardens and the school, about memories from their years together. On a warm spring day in May of 1933, Rose was in the wildflower garden with her great-granddaughter Emma, a curious 6-year-old who loved flowers as much as Rose did. They were looking at the different blooms, and Rose was teaching Emma their names and characteristics, just as she had taught so many students over the years. "Great-grandma, why do you love flowers so much?" Emma asked. Rose smiled. "Because flowers are hope. They start as tiny seeds in the dark earth, and they push up through the soil toward the light, and they bloom into something beautiful. People are like that too. We all start small and in the darkness sometimes, but if we keep reaching toward the light, we can bloom into something wonderful." "Did you bloom?" "I did, with help from your great-grandfather. He planted a garden for me when I needed it most, and that garden grew into all of this." She gestured at the expansive homestead, the school buildings, the family members visible in the distance. "Never underestimate what can grow from small beginnings, Emma. I started by picking wildflowers for Pennies, and look what it became." That evening, after Emma had been taken home by her parents, Rose sat on her favorite bench in the wildflower section. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gorgeous colors, and the air was full of the scent of blooming flowers. She felt tired, but it was a good tired, the tiredness of a long life well lived. She thought about that first day, so many years ago, when she had been sitting by the saloon selling flowers and a dusty cowboy had ridden up and bought them all. She thought about Xavier's kindness, his patience, his love that had transformed both their lives. She thought about the garden he had planted for her and how it had grown beyond anything either of them had imagined. "I am ready," she said softly to the gathering darkness. "I am ready to see you again, Xavier. We have work to do on the other side, gardens to plant in heaven." Rose Rourke passed away that night in her sleep, at the age of 77. They buried her next to Xavier on the hill, and the whole community mourned the loss of a remarkable woman who had touched so many lives. But the legacy continued. Alice took over the flower business and ran it for another 30 years. The school continued to educate women in horticulture and business, graduating thousands of students over the decades. The homestead remained in the family, passed down through the generations. And the gardens continued to bloom, year after year, a living testament to the love between a cowboy and a girl who picked wildflowers. The wildflower section became particularly special to the family. It was where proposals happened, where children played, where family members went to think and remember. A stone bench was placed there with a bronze plaque that read, "In memory of Xavier and Rose Rourke." He bought her wildflowers, planted her a garden, and together they grew love. And every spring, without fail, the wildflowers bloomed in profusion, purple lupines and yellow marigolds and red paintbrush, a riot of color and life that reminded everyone who saw them that beautiful things can grow from the smallest beginnings, that love planted with care can flourish for generations, and that sometimes the best investments are the ones made with the heart rather than the head. The story of Xavier and Rose became a family legend, passed down through the generations. Great-great-grandchildren who never knew them personally still heard about the bounty hunter who gave up his guns for gardens, the poor girl selling flowers for pennies who built a business empire, and the love that transformed them both. And whenever someone in the family faced difficulties or doubted whether they could achieve their dreams, someone would remind them, "Remember Xavier and Rose. Remember the wildflowers. Small beginnings can lead to extraordinary endings."